Blazor Server is an excellent choice for a web application. But unless your audience only speaks one language, you probably need to consider localization. Localization is the ability to present an application in the culture of the user. This is more than just about translating text. Different cultures have different currency, different ways of representing numbers, different date formats, and more. In this video, we're going to apply localization to Blazor Server app in a way that will present the user with the site in their culture, both their language and their layouts. But it will also give them the option to change the culture of the site. Now, if this is the first video you've watched of mine, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. I provide videos twice a week here on YouTube to help you grow as a developer. I also have a full set of training courses on IamTimCorey.com. I encourage you to check out all my resources that I have to offer. Now, if you find a gap in the C# training I provide and want to see me cover a specific topic or area, please let me know in the comments below. I take suggestions very seriously. I'll put yours on a list, and I don't guarantee that I'll cover it, but I definitely guarantee that I'll review it and consider it. The more people that ask for a topic or upvote a suggested topic, the more likely it is that I'll cover that topic in a future video or course. Okay, let's jump into the code. We're going to start by creating a new project. And we're going to say this is a Blazor app, which you can find down here under Blazor app. We hit next. And let's call this local Blazor. And we'll call this our culture demo, or let's call it localization demo. That seems clear. We're going to do a Blazor Server app. They have two choices here, Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. I've done intro videos on both of these topics, so we won't go into depth here. If you have more questions, I do have intro videos to Blazor Server and also WebAssembly, and I talk about the differences. Now, we're not going to add authentication. We are going to do HTTPS. We're not going to enable Docker support. And I am using the template that's version 3.1.10. That's the latest for the release version of Visual Studio at the time of this recording. If yours is later than that, cool. I don't think you'll have any problems following along this demo. It'd only be if you're trying to use an earlier version, an older version, where you might have an issue if certain things aren't supported yet, but you should be fine. Let's hit create. And once this template is created, we've got a number of things that we're going to need to do to this. Now, localization works a bit differently in Blazor Server than it does in the other types of web applications. And the reason for that is because it has 1 foot in server side and 1 foot in client side. Now, what that means, if you're not familiar, server-side applications, what they do is they render the application for you on the server and then give the client just HTML and CSS and if JavaScript, if there is any. That's a server-side language. So you write it in C#, but then that C# code goes away by the time it hits the user. It's already built the web application and just sent them the final results. A client-side application is what you'd normally get from an Angular, React, or Vue application where all the work is done on the client. So you send all of your source code down to the client and then run your source code on the client's browser machine or browser that they are working with. So that's a client-side application. Blazor does kind of both. It does some rendering on the server, and then it does some more rendering on the client, but you never send your C# code to the client. So there's a bit of both worlds going on here. So you have a little bit more challenge sometimes when you're dealing with localization because of the fact that there is that little bit of both worlds. Blazor WebAssembly, I've covered this in my WebAssembly course. Getting the, and it's called Exploring Blazor WebAssembly, by the way. But getting localization to work there was pretty simple. It's just add a NuGet package and away you go, because you're doing everything on the client. But on the server, there's some more work to be done. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a drop-down box. Let's run this real quick. So I'll hit the run button here. I just want to show you what the site looks like right now, right out of the box, no changes, just a bare bones. You'll probably seen this before if you've done any Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor Server stuff. I've zoomed it in here. Notice the zoom right now is on 175%. So you can see it a lot clearer. But this is a standard application. What I want to do is I want to put right about here. See where my cursor is next to the About link up here? I want to put a drop down that allows the user to select which culture they want, which language they want. And with the language will come the rest of the stuff. And so we're gonna have a drop down there. We'll do sample stuff. I am not going to translate this entire site, nor am I going to pretend that I know a second language and try to put things in that language. I don't want to insult the rest of you who are watching who do know 2 languages, and you're gonna look at that and go, that ain't right. So I'm not gonna try and do that. I'm gonna show you, we're gonna change the wording. We're gonna change probably hello world. I believe in Spanish that's hola mundo. So we'll use that, but we're gonna, say this is hello world in Spanish. This is hello world in, whatever. And so we'll do it that way. We won't necessarily change all the wording, but I'll show you how to, okay? And then when you do actual translations, you can do that. One tip here, if you can't get someone that knows the language you're translating into, the first step is probably Google Translate. It is not perfect. Do not think that it's perfect. But I tell you what, getting 80% of the way there is usually better than having 0% of the way there. Okay, so I still encourage you to find someone that knows the language you're trying to write in, because just doing a literal translation of words is not always ideal. Okay, so that's the app. We're gonna put that download button right next to this About in the upper right-hand corner, and that will translate this. We're also gonna put a date time on here just to show what would be the difference. So this is gonna take a few steps. And normally I like to do a step and then show it, and then do the next step and show it. But there's quite a few steps in here that have to be done kind of in order before anything can be seen. So we're gonna go through those. I'm gonna walk you through them step by step by step. And we'll talk about them as we go, but a lot of these are copy and paste. So if you want to copy and paste my example, which by the way, the source code is down in the description. There's a link to get the source code for this video. Now, I do want to point out that's going to ask you for your first name and your email address. What that will do is going to email you the link to get email an actual file to you of the source code. Sometimes spam filters catch that and say, hey, you're emailing a zip file with code in it. That's dangerous. It's not. But if they catch it, just check your spam filter. If you can't find it, email me, help@IamTimCorey. We'll get that to you right away. That will put you on the mailing list. Just so you know, you're paying for the file with your email address, but as soon as you say unsubscribe, you're off the list. Now, just want to note real quick here, some people are saying unsubscribe from a list, but not from the entire list. There's 2 options there. Make sure you get unsubscribed for the entire thing if you don't get emails from me. All right. Now, if you stay on that list, you'll get discounts, you'll get future giveaways, those kind of things. I try not to spam you. You'll probably get 2 to 3, maybe 4 emails in a month. So that's just want to clear that up, make sure you're on the same page, and you can get the source code if you want it. All right. So like I said, most of this stuff's copy and paste, but there is a few steps to do before you can see this in action. So step number 1, right click on dependencies and manage NuGet packages. We're going to add a new one. So under browse and look for Microsoft.extensions.localization. Looking for this NuGet package right here. Right now it's in version 3.1.9. Again, if it's a later version that's not a pre-release, go ahead and use that. Hit install, accept. And that's going to help us with a couple of things we're doing with localization. Next, we're going to go into the place that most applications get the changes in, and that is startup.cs. This is kind of like the heart of your application configuration. If you're wanting to change your application in some fundamental way, if you want to add something that's going to apply the whole application or is going to modify the whole application in some way, probably the place you're going to go is startup.cs. In the configure services, we want to add a couple of services. One, services.add controllers. Notice I didn't add any using statements. It's already there. What is this? Well, that's actually adding MVC. Some of you ask, well, how do I do ASP.NET Core MVC? That's a pretty popular .NET framework type, the MVC is. We don't use MVC as much in .NET Core, but the cool thing is we can bring in and use parts of MVC without having to have an entire application built on MVC. In fact, if you use identity from the built-in authorization and identity from Microsoft, then you're using MVC controllers for things like log on, log off, register, and all the rest. So we're going to create one controller. That's all we're going to do. We're going to create that one controller. So we have to add controllers here. And then we're also going to add localization. So services.add localization. And we're going to say options and the arrow, not that. I'm trying to name this well instead of just saying X. But if you tab with IntelliSense, it's going to say, oh, did you mean like it just did? So this is my made up parameter name. It's not hard set in stone. You know, you could say X and that would work as well, but I feel that it's better to say something like options because this is the options for localization, and that's a little clearer. So options dot, so you're not going to use that name. So options dot resource path equals, equals resources. There we go. So what this is going to do is saying we're going to add localization and we're going to put all of, if we spell that right, wow, you're probably yelling at me right now. So we're going to put all of our localization stuff in the resources folder, which is where? Well, we don't have one. So right click on Blazor, the project, and say new folder and say resources and spell it right. So everything we're going to do when it comes to translations is going to go in the resources folder. Now, remember I said that localization is more than about just translating your words. So instead of just saying hello world equals hola mundo, there's more to it than that. But the resources folder is for those translations. So that's where that's going to live, is the resources folder. So you just pointed it out and said that's where it lives. If you want to change that, cool, go for it. You want to call it culture. Call it culture, let's rename your folder to culture. This is just the folder name where you put your stuff. So that's the two settings we have in the configure services method of startup.cs. Next up, right after configure services, that's fine. It doesn't matter where it goes, except you have to make sure it's not inside of a method. So outside of a method, we're going to create a, let's move my mouse over there, private, not void. It's going to be private. I forget the type. So let's just say void for now. This is a cheat here. If you don't know the return type, make it void to start with, then figure out what your return type is and change the return type. So private void, let's call this get localization options. And what this will be is a helper method that we'll use in just a minute. So we're going to fill this in with some helper stuff. So var cultures equals configuration. Now, where did configuration come from? Well, that comes from right here, which is passed into startup right here. What is configuration? Remember our I configuration? If you watch the video, I believe it's called Intro to App Settings, where I talk about app settings and about talking to this appsettings.json file among a number of other places. We used the configuration. And we said that that gets built in this create default builder. Notice if you mouse over, it says load host I configuration and all the different setups. Well, we're passing that into startup so that the startup stuff can use that configuration to access the appsettings.json file or other settings locations. So I'm going to say get section, and that section is going to be cultures. We don't have one of those yet, but we're going to. And I'm going to say, do it on new line so we don't make it too big. We can also make this a little smaller. But we're going to say dot get children to dictionary of, and I will say in here, x arrow x dot key x arrow x dot value. So what am I doing here? Well, I'm loading the section called cultures. We don't have one of those yet. Well, let's create one real quick so I can illustrate this as we go. Cultures. Okay, so it's going to add this section. So get section cultures. Cool. Then it says get children. Well, right now there's not any children in here. There will be. Just a minute. And it says, okay, in those children, send them to dictionary where there's a key and there's a value. So that's the two things we're going to pass in to our dictionary. Now, what are key and value? We know what key and, well, you may know what key and value are when it comes to dictionary. A dictionary has two pieces of information. It has the key, which is the thing you look it up by, and the value. So for example, think of an actual dictionary where if you want to look up a definition, you would look up its key. That's the word. And then when you found that key, they would give you a value. That's the definition. So that's what a dictionary is in C#. It's a key with a value. You can only have, every key is unique. You can't have the same key more than once. Now you can have multiple values, like the same value more than once, that's fine, but each key has to be unique. But in our case, this x.key is saying that's actually a key from the configuration section. So you go over to appsettings.json, let's just look at log level as an example. This is the key, this is the value, which sounds an awful lot like a dictionary, which is why we're sending the children to a dictionary. So this culture will be a dictionary of type string, and the key will be the appsettings.json key, and the value will be the appsettings.json value. So in our cultures, we're going to have en-us, and we'll say USA. And then we'll have es-es, and we'll say Spain. And we'll have es-mx, and we'll say Mexico. Now, these are three cultures. These are actually predetermined culture references. So it says the language and then the culture. So the language is English, the culture is US. The language is Spanish, yes, and the culture is Spain. The language is Spanish, but the culture is Mexico. So these allow us to have the same language, but different. You see what I'm saying? So both people in England and the US both speak English. People in Great Britain may debate that, but we say things differently. We do things a little differently. And so that's why we have different cultures. So the same thing with Spanish. Spanish is spoken across a lot of the world, or a big portion of the world at least, and there's different cultures around that. So we're going to grab just 3 here. These are just examples, but these are pretty locked in. Now, this over here is just my country description. So this is a rough cut of saying, okay, this is from Spain, this is from Mexico, this is the US. There can be some differentiators in there. These are not standard names, but we're going to use this in our drop down to say, hey, select the USA culture versus the Great Britain culture or the UK culture or the Spain culture or Mexico or whatever. So that's the key and the value. So key and value, that goes in the dictionary. That's now our list of cultures. var supported cultures equals cultures dot keys to array. Now, why I do it this way? Well, I probably could have made it one link statement up here, but I want to be kind of clear as what's happening here. So that's why I put it in a dictionary first, and then I broke apart and said, just give me the keys. That's all I care about. Now, you can use this line right here anywhere in your code, as long as you have access to configuration, which you should have everywhere. So we can reuse this line other places, and that's why I kind of broke it apart like that. But in our case, we just care about the keys, which if we remember, that's just the standard way of identifying the language and culture. So we have just those keys now in this supported cultures list. We're going to say var, let's scroll up a little bit so you can see it a little better. var localization options equals new request localization options. I'll go to the next line, but I'm still continuing. Notice there's no semicolon here. And say dot add supported cultures. We're going to say supported cultures. So we're saying, hey, add these supported cultures. Which cultures? Well, this one, and this one. But then we're also going to say add supported UI cultures. We're going to say supported cultures there as well. Now, what's the difference between supported cultures and supported UI cultures? Great question. I'm glad you asked it. Supported cultures is all about the date formats. I'm sorry, not date data formats. For example, date is a big one. So in the US, we say month/day/year. So if you're talking about, let's give an example, February 12th of 2021, you would say 2/12/21. Let's write it down. So 2/12/21, that would be in the US, February 12th, 2021. However, in other cultures, they read day, month, year. Now, to be honest, I think this makes a whole lot more sense as day, month, year. But the US has always done things a little differently. We also have the imperial system instead of metric, which is just, again, horrible. But I can't change that. So that would mean that this would be December 2nd of 2021. It's important to know what culture you're dealing with, because otherwise, if you display a date like this, two different people will have two radically different views on what that date means, unless it's in the culture that applies to them. That's why we have supported cultures. That takes care of that. The same thing with certain cultures, when they write out a number, might say, here's one the US will do, 1,234.56. That'd be 1,234 let's say $.56. Whereas other cultures might say, and for those of you who deal with more than one culture, you already know as I'm preaching to the choir, I understand, but for a US audience, we probably don't. So I might say 1.234, comma, 56. Same number, different culture. The dots and the commas are flipped. So it's important to make sure you change the culture. But there's also the idea of, it says hello world, and I want to say hola mundo. Well, that's where the supported UI cultures comes in. That will be your resource files that are in the resources folder, or whatever you named it. That's the translation files. We want to change both of these at the same time. So we're going to make sure that when we change one, we change them both, and that that allows us to have the best, easiest, clearest representation of both our data and our language, or our words. So that's the localization options. And so we're going to return localization options, which localization options is a request localization options. See, it's changed my void to request localization options. Now it's happy with me. We're good to go. So now I can just, instead of doing all this code somewhere inside of, I believe it's configure, we're going to just call just this instead. All right, so let's save this. And let's come down here in the configure method under use static files. The ordering here can be important. So we'll make sure you put it in the same place I do. You probably won't have a problem if you move it a little bit, but let's keep it below static files and above routing. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to say app.useRequest localization. And for the value for this, the actual configuration, we're going to say get localization options. So you see this whole method up here, that's going to get returned and put in as options for the use request localization field. So that's what we're going to do in the configure. And then one last thing in here under use endpoints, we're going to say at the top, endpoints dot, we're going to say map controllers. Again, we're using MVC, so we have to map the controllers in our different endpoints. So we know how to go to certain paths that are on our controllers. So that's what we're going to do there. That's going to take care of the last little bit of MVC setup work we have to do. That also takes care of everything we do in startup.cs and in appsettings.json. So we're done with both of those files, which means I think it's time to add our controller, our one controller we're going to add. So right click on local Blazor and say add folder first, and we'll say controllers. Now again, I am mixing in MVC to a Blazor Server project. That's the beauty of ASP.NET Core, because we don't have to lock ourselves into one type. If we find there's a benefit to using a Razor page somewhere, cool, go ahead and use it. If you want to use a little bit of MVC somewhere else, cool, go ahead and use it. And that's what we're going to do here. So under controllers, we're going to keep the same convention that MVC has. We're going to say add controller, an MVC controller empty, and let's call this the culture controller. So in here, right above the class, but inside the namespace, we're going to say route, and we'll give it the route, which is controller inside square brackets / action. So that specifies, hey, here's the path to this, which is the controller name, which is culture, / the action name, which in our case is not going to be indexed. We're going to change this to set culture. So we're going to say our URL /culture/set culture. And we're not going to return a view. Okay, so in here, we're going to set the culture, but we're going to pass in a couple of things. String culture and also string redirect URI. Make sure I spell that right. Redirect. Yep, I did. If culture is not equal to null, meaning if you pass in a value to culture, then we're going to say HTTP context.response.cookies. Yes, we're going to set a cookie. Append, and I'll actually go a separate line here for this. We're going to say cookie request culture provider dot default cookie name. Cookie request culture provider dot make cookie value. I'm getting hungry now. New request culture. And then at the very bottom here, outside the if, return local redirect. I'm going to explain this in just a minute. Redirect URI. So what this is doing is saying when you call the set culture, what I want you to do is if there's a culture being passed in, go ahead and set that as the culture for this user. This is very helpful. In fact, that's what we're going to use when we have that drop down. So remember we said that next to the about link, we're going to have this drop down. It's like set my culture. And we're going to say USA or Spain or Mexico. Those are the three options. And we're going to choose one, and then it's going to change the culture of our browser, including the language and those data formats. Well, this is how it's going to do it. It's going to set a cookie on the user side that says, hey, you want this site in, Spain culture. And it's going to set that information. We're going to look at that cookie in the browser and see what it does. Now, sometimes people get a little concerned about cookies, especially since there's some rulings, especially in Europe, that talk about cookies and what you can't do with it. ASP.core is great about cookies. There's even a built-in warning about cookies and about what they're used for. And this is not one of those bad cookies. This is not a tracking cookie. Instead, what it is a little piece of data on the user side saving their preference. That's all it is. And so we'll see what that is. We'll see how small it is. We'll see what it does. And we'll even see how to delete it if you want to reset it back to default. So if they set the value, we're going to store it on their side so they can see it in the culture they want. And then either way, we're going to redirect to whatever page they were on when they set this culture. Now, we're using a local redirect. This is another way that ASP.NET Core is superior to even ASP.NET because we have the concept of local redirect. And this is taking security to the next level. What it does is says, we're going to do a redirect. But the problem is you're passing in what you want me to redirect to. And if we were smart, we had some malware we wrote, something like that, we could inject our own URL here, our URI, and we could say, hey, when you're done authentication, when you're done saying your culture, I want you to go to, timcoreyiscool.com instead of the site you were on. And maybe even I make it look like the site you were on, so you think you're still on that same site, but in fact, you're on my site instead. Local redirect says, we'll go ahead and redirect you, but only if the URL is on the same site we're on right now. That's what local redirect is. So you can't redirect to Google from here. You have to redirect to the same root URL that you're on right now. So if you're on iamtimcorey.com, you can't redirect to timcoreyiscool.com no matter how much you try, because local redirect will not allow you. That's a really great safety feature. So really simple, just local redirect, good to go. It will redirect you safely. So that's our whole controller. That's everything. That's one method. That's all we're going to do. So let's close that out now. And now we're going to create in the shared folder. We're almost done. We're creating the shared folder a new Razor component. Now again, Razor components, if you've watched my intro to Blazor Server, Razor components are just Blazor objects. They're called Razor components. So we're going to call this the choose language. I had a hard time spelling today. And this is going to be our dropdown. So we're going to get rid of the H3 tag at the top. And we're going to say, we're going to have a couple of injections. At inject, this is from dependency injection. So this is the same as asking for it from your constructor if it's a C# class. Navigation manager, we'll call this just navigation manager. And then inject, in this one, I don't think we'll have a, say I configuration. Yep, doesn't have the using statement in our imports. Call it configuration. And I don't like to have these massive things here, so let's cut this out. It's going to yell at me first because I don't have the using statement. I go to imports at using, and there we go. Now it's available to every Blazor component. So that has made it simpler for me by putting it in imports.razor. All right, now what we're going to do is in the code section, I'm going to say private string selected. Wow, hard time spelling today, huh? Selected culture equals system.threading.thread.current UI culture.name. Actually, let's grab current culture, not current UI culture. There we go. So we're gonna have the current culture from the thread we're on. So if it doesn't know, let's have a default here, a default culture. That's what that's doing for our selected culture. Private dictionary of type string. Sound familiar? Cultures. Well, I'm going to have a protected override on the onInitialized, and that always messes up the tabbing. So highlight the whole thing and hit Shift Tab, brings it back once. You don't need base.onInitialized, but this method is going to get called after we set up all of our injections up here. So we can call this and say cultures equals configuration dot get section cultures. Sound familiar? Next line dot get children to dictionary. In fact, I could have copied and pasted this. X dot key, comma, X arrow, X dot value. So that's the same line we had earlier. I could have copied and pasted, like I said, but that will put that into this dictionary. That's the list of all of our cultures, but notice we're grabbing the keys and the values and keeping them. Because now we're gonna have this drop down that will show us all of the available options to us. Now, I haven't mentioned it yet, but note that I selected 3, kind of at random, kind of just, hey, let's grab it, a couple to show off a couple of things. But you could put any you want in here. And if you add more cultures, as long as the code is correct that you put in, then it will add to this application. You don't have to change any code in order to get that to work. Just keep adding items or changing, removing some, and your code will continue to work. So this is going to populate the dropdown based upon that appsettings.json file and everything else. So the only thing that change is just that settings file. Okay, so now we have our cultures loaded. I need to have one onChange method. So private void onChange. Let's call it onChanged. And this is going to get called whenever we change the, actually not unchanged. Let's call it request culture change. How about that? That's clear. So whenever the user says, I want to change my cultures, they're going to call this method. We're going to say var culture equals selected culture. Actually, we don't need to do that line. I had originally thought I was going to break that apart and do something else with it, but we're just going to grab this selected culture. So whatever has been selected, it's going to be in this value. So let's use that. So var URI equals new URI navigation manager. That's where we brought that in on our using statement, our inject statement. Navigation manager.uri dot get, let's put this in a new line because it's going to be long. Get components, URI components dot path and query. URI format unescaped. So what it's going to do is get the current URI. Now, we often say URL for Uniform Resource Locator. URI is slightly different. It's Uniform Resource Identifier. So this is essentially that thing you find at the top of your browser. It's going to have the full path for where you want to go. Well, it's going to grab that and it says get the path and the query. Meaning if there's any query parameters on your browser URL, the path, it's going to grab those as well, and it's going to not escape them. It's going to say if there's special characters there, don't escape them. What that does is we're just not going to do it twice. We're going to grab it once and then we'll escape it later, but that way we don't do it twice because we don't need to. So next we're going to say var query equals, and then we're going to start with our string interpolation, which is our $ first, that we can stick stuff in the middle of our string, and say question mark culture equals curly brace, open and close it, it's easier, URI.escape data string, selected culture. Okay, so we're going to escape that data string, make sure we don't put anything sensitive or that won't work on the URL. We're going to put that escaped into our path as culture. And then after that, we're going to say ampersand. And then let's add this to a second line because otherwise we're going to, again, go too long. And again, we're going to do string interpolation. You have to do it again if you say the plus here. This plus here, you don't have to have it, you can keep going, but then it makes it one long line, and I like to have it in readable format so you can see it, the whole thing on your screen. So redirect URI, make sure you spell these things right, equals, open and close your curly braces, URI.escape data string URI. That's where that escape is going to come in. So we don't have to escape it here if we're going to escape it down here, which we're already going to do, and we're going to put that into our redirect. So what we're going to do is take our current path, and then we're going to pass in both our culture and our place to go back to. So with both of those being done, now we can say navigation manager dot navigate to /culture /set culture. Sound familiar? That's our one MVC controller. Plus query. What's that? That's what we just built right here. So we're going to put this question mark culture, ampersand, redirect URI, and it's going to put that at the end of our, in this case, relative URL, which is going to expand into the full URL. And then after query, I say force load colon true. And what that does is make sure you force the loading of this page to, after we navigate to it, we're going to change our culture. So it's going to navigate to the right spot, and it's going to apply our culture, and it's kind of going to look like magic, but we know what it's doing now. It's just saying that when you select that, go ahead and navigate to that location, which is our MVC controller. And once you've done the work of applying, which our controller, it says, okay, create that cookie with the new culture and then redirect to the URL you give us. Well, that URL will be the this right here, the redirect URI, and it's going to pass us back to where you were, but with the new translations. So that's all the code for this page, but we don't have a dropdown yet. Let's go back up here under inject, before code, and say if cultures is not equal to null. Notice that cultures right here starts off as not being assigned, so therefore it's null. But as soon as we get the uninitialized, we're going to configure it. If I didn't do this, then what would happen is, since I want to loop through the list of cultures, if the cultures list was null, then it would crash. But since I'm doing a check first for null, it won't render this intersection unless there's a value here. And once the value is here, then I'll go ahead and render it. I'm going to say form class equals form dash inline. There's a little bit of bootstrap stuff that I'm going to do just to make it look a little prettier. Select class equals form control and mr-2. Whoops, that goes inside the class, mr-2. And we're also going to bind this. Bind equals selected culture. Okay, so let's explain what I'm doing here and why I'm doing like these classes here. This is Bootstrap 4. So in ASP.NET Core, we're using Bootstrap as the default layout provider for our application. That's what comes out of the box from Microsoft. No, you don't have to use it. However, Bootstrap is pretty common and it does a lot of great stuff. And it's not very heavy on the overhead. I see people often that really push back against using it because they think that somehow it's massive and bloated and all kind of stuff. It's not. You can use it, it'll be fine. If you don't want to use it though, that's fine. The Microsoft templates will all use it. So you'll have to redo their layouts, but you don't have to use it. But this is saying apply the form inline to this form, apply some styles to this form, and then this select, which is selected as a dropdown, it's going to apply the form control, which is going to make it be a bit bigger and the font be a little bit bigger, and it just looks a little nicer than the standard blah select box would be from HTML. MR2, that's saying the margin on the right, I want it to be the standard 2 width, not 2 pixels, not 2 EM. There's a setting from 1 to, I believe it's 5 or 6. In fact, we can find out real quick here. If I said MR dash, it's 6. So 0 through 5. So these are different margins on the right that you can apply with just a class. So instead of doing inline styles, you can just say, hey, apply this class. It's going to apply the standard margin. The nice thing there is that if you use that, then all your margins are standard. And so you're saying, oh, well, this one's 2 pixels, this one's 4 pixels, this one's 8 pixels. They're all standard. And they're standardized on one of these 6 different sizes, which you can, again, set what those would be. There's also margin for left. There's also padding, PR and PL for padding right and padding left. This isn't a Bootstrap class, but I wanted to at least touch on that. So we're going to bind this select. The value is going to be bound to selected culture. That starts off with a default of the current culture, which is a string. But then if we change it, it's going to be whatever is selected. Now, we're going to have an option, which is select. And then we're going to have an at for each. We're going to say for each culture in cultures. And we'll say in here, option value equals at culture dot key. And then inside of the option itself, we're going to say at culture dot value. This is taking our, capital K here. This is taking our dictionary. That's the dictionary right there, the cultures, which is our list of, let's open up here. This is our key. This is our value. So we're going to show the value. So it's going to say USA, Spain, or Mexico. And the key is going to be that EN-US or ES-ES or ES-MX. So the value is what gets put into this selected culture. So the selected culture will say EN-US or ES-ES and so on. That's how we're going to do this select. And then afterwards, I toyed around the idea of having it automatically change the culture as soon as you change the dropdown. But I was finding that wasn't ideal. So instead, I create a button. Class, again, this is going to be Bootstrap stuff. Class equals btn for button. And then btn-outline-primary. And then at on click equals on, nope, not on change. We change it to request culture change. Let's call it change. So this button, now when you click it, it's going to call the request culture change, which will look at the selected culture that you selected from the dropdown, and then it's going to navigate appropriately. Now I don't have a check in here for what if it's an empty string. I probably could. If selected culture, actually, let's just do this. String is null or white space on selected culture. Return. Basically, don't do anything. So that does make sure that you don't select the option here. Have that, just a select ... as your selected value. Now, we should never have this probably because of the fact that we're going to highlight the current culture that's currently selected. All right, but that's it for that Razor component, which is a Blazor component. So now what we're going to do is in our main layout.razor. So this is where the about link is. Right above this, we're going to say span class equals PR-2. What does it stand for? It stands for padding right of 2. We're going to say site language. So we're going to have padding of right, which means we're going to have a little bit of space in the right. And then we'll say choose language and have a self-closing tag. What is that tag? Well, that's our component we just created in the shared folder, choose language. That's this thing we just worked on. So we can use it now as a component and throw that on this navigation or this spot up here at the very top, which is right next to the about link. Now, I want to show this to you just so you see it, but you can't actually use it quite yet. But that way you at least see it so you know what you're looking at. So we load this up And now notice site language says USA. That's what we detected as my current culture. And we can select, hey, Spain or Mexico, and hit change if we want to. But again, nothing will happen at this point. If I were to choose Spain, nothing seems to happen. So it did set that cookie. And in fact, let's go F12 here. And if we go to our, I believe it's application. There we go. Under application, F12 is your friend in the browser. I mean, just use F12 all the time. It's the developer tools. So if F12 doesn't work for you, if you go to this triple ellipsis, or this ellipsis up here as 3 dots, whatever it is, and you look for more tools, developer tools. See, it says Control Shift, is it an L or an I? I'm not sure which. But F12 works for me for Windows. It may or may not work for you, but just find developer tools. So more tools, developer tools. All browsers have this. Maybe it be called a little bit different, but it's usually developer tools. So this is Chrome. So under the application tab, we have a number of things. We have cookies. Expand this out. You'll see I have a cookie for this site. And in fact, let's make it a little bit bigger. So this is the ASP.NET Core Culture cookie. And if you notice the value, it's right here. In fact, let's see if we can zoom in. Hey, we can. This right here is the entirety of the value of that cookie. So that cookie is minuscule. We're not taking up the user's storage space with this. It's a few bytes, not even kilobytes. And it says C%3D, which I believe is equals. So culture equals, that's escaped character from HTML. So culture equals en-us. And then we have %7C, is that a semicolon? I'm not positive. But then we have UIC, or UI culture, again, equals en-us. So it shows us the culture and the UI culture that's set in the cookie. That's what gets remembered from use to use. So let's zoom back out here a little bit. I'm not even sure what the default was anymore. I'll zoom in a little bit more. But yeah, size is 42, I believe it's in bytes. What we can do, if you want to, is you can right click and say clear. And then now you have no more cookie here, or no more value for this cookie for the site. So there's no cookies for this site anymore, and we've reset it back to defaults. So if you ever had a problem with, testing something out, you had a cookie you want to get reset, that's how you do it, under application tab. Okay, close it out. We'll close this out as well. And we have a couple more things to do in here, and then we're done. One of the things we have to do is add resource files. So let's do that. Right click on resources and say add new item and search for resource. You get resource file. It's got a .resx extension. We're going to name this app. Now, the naming here is important. I'm going to show you why in just a minute, but name yours app.resx. This casing, so capital A, lowercase pp, name it like this. It's going to make it the simplest. Hit add. Now, this is your default file. You don't have to have this default file if you don't want. You don't have to put stuff in this default file if you want. We're going to talk about how to kind of bypass the need for default file by how we name our keys. So just note that you don't have to have this file, but if you want to have this file, now you can modify the name and the value. It's a key value pair. The comment is just for you. So what I did when I used to use these resource files, I worked at a company where we had, I think, 4 different languages we used. Arabic, Spanish, French, and English. What I would do is I would create the default file in English because that's what our primary customer base was. But I would create all the entries, even though I didn't have to. I'd create them in here. and then I'd put in the comments what that value is for. Then I'd copy the file and create, let's say, the French version. I'd clear out the values, but I'd keep the comments in English because that's for me. So that the name and the comment help me understand what each piece is, and the value is whatever translation, whatever language that file is for. So that's how I would do things just to make my life a little easier. So in our case, we're going to create one hello world, and the value is hello world. Sure, it's called, let's hit enter, call it good, and save that file. So now we have the key and the value. And it seems pretty useless at this point. I'm translating hello world into hello world. But let's right click on resources and add another file. So new item. We're still on resource, but if not, you can type resource in the search box. And again, naming is important here. App.resx. And ES is lowercase. So here is the hello world. That's the same tag. But in this case, we're going to say hola mundo. I think I got that right. Let me know in the comments below if I did or not. But that's going to be our Spanish version. In fact, let's do this. Put in parentheses Spanish. Because again, I want to show off that this is what happens, not necessarily that the translation is correct, because I'm, again, horrible at other languages. So that's our Spanish translation. Let's create one more. So right click and say add new item. Again, resource file has been selected already. And this one we're going to call, again, naming is important, app.es-mx, all lowercase. There we go. We're going to say hello world. Let's say hola mundo. I believe it's the same. I believe it's the same for Mexico Spanish versus, or Mexican Spanish, sorry, versus Spain Spanish. But let's say Mexico version, something like that. And we're gonna hit save. So now we know we have, Spanish, and we have for Mexico specific. So let's save all of these. And now let's close all of these. So you have just that one translation. That's all we've got. Now let's go to our main page. So index.razor. And we got hello world here. I don't have the exclamation point. Oh, well. We're going to say instead, let's inject first. At inject iString localizer, which that is actually from Microsoft.extensions.localization.iString localizer. We'll change it in just a minute. And we'll call and say of type app. Localizer. So let's first move this over. I'll cut this out. And we'll go over to our imports.razor using and put it there. Now, we don't have to put it here. You could put a using statement right here. So you could say at using and paste it in there. But the reason I do it in that file is because I'm expecting to use the iString localizer a lot. Therefore, I put it in the imports instead. So I said iString localizer, which if you've done localization in other ASP.NET Core like MVC or Razor pages, there's iString localizer, there's iHTML localizer, and a couple others. With Blazor Server, you can only use iString localizer at this time. Not a big deal. But that's what I use, and then we have to give it a type. And so we're saying the type is app. Well, app refers to this whole application. It's a keyword. It's called, Blazor app.app. If you look in the program, you'll see that, is it program or is it startup? That it references app. So I'm not gonna look for it now. I don't want too much time. But that refers to this particular project. That's standard across all projects. It's called app. You can, if you want, create localization files per grouping. So for example, you could say, I want a localization file just for the index.razor page. And so you could create a subfolder under resources for pages and then one for index. And you can say in here, you could pass in index instead, and it'd find that file name. So it'd find the index file. We called everything app because we're going to use everything under the app file. But of course, if you have a massive application, you wouldn't want one resource file because that would just be hideously huge. So instead, you'd create one maybe per file or maybe per section or something like that. But this has to refer to an actual type in your application. So just so you know that, a little more depth we need to get into in this video, but I want to point that out that you don't have to just use app. You can be more specific and then dial things in a little more. All right, so localizer, we're gonna right in here, instead of saying hello world, what we're gonna say is at localizer. And then in here, we'll say in square brackets, hello world. Look familiar? Well, that's the key. We're saying localize, here's the key, go find the value based upon the current culture. Now, if you don't have anything in your app.resx file, like I don't, that's interesting. I think something happened here because I have the Spanish version. Hello world. And this is the from Mexico version. Let's save that. These are a little touchy sometimes. It's still there though. And I don't have anything in the app.resx. Let's leave it like that for now. Because I want to show off the fact that since it doesn't find it in the culture I'm currently in, it's going to default back to the default if there is one in app.resx. And if there isn't one in here, it's going to default back to the actual key. So if you name the key the actual value it should be in your primary language, then you don't even have to have these resource files yet. You can just go around and say localizer, this key. It's not going to find it. It's going to fall back to the actual value you have inside quotes. But then you're ready to create localization files. So there's that. Let's also do one more tag. Let's do an H2 tag right below. And we'll say at datetime, let's say datetime.now, and these are too long. Let's just say datetime now. That should be everything we need to have the full date and time. We could format if you want to. You know what? Let's do to short date string, and then we'll say, I know we're doing a lot of H2 tags here, but we'll say at datetime.now.toLong date string. So we can see both in their, their methods. You gotta put your open close parens again. So you can see the value of the short date string. Remember I said that we're gonna flip those around based on the culture. And then also the long date string will say, January. And it's, of course, we don't say January in Spanish. You say, I'm not sure. We're gonna find out what October is because that's what we're currently in. So that's our setup. So let's run this again. And once it starts, we now have hello world. We have 10/26/2020, and it's Monday, October 26th, 2020. And let's change the value from USA to Spain. Hola mundo in Spanish, notice it's now 2610. And lunes, and 26 de octubre, day 2020. How horrible is my pronunciation? But there you go. There is Spain Spanish. If we change to Mexico, this doesn't change, but now it says Hola Mundo from Mexico. It's pulling from a different file. Now, both Spain and Mexico speak Spanish. So how is it we have different translations up here? Well, if we look, we created an app.es.resx file, and that is just a Spanish file. But then we have an app.es-mx file. This is the more specific file for Mexico. So we have a default Spanish file, but then if we have more specific things, we can put it in the Mexico version of Spanish. So we don't have to put everything in here if most of the stuff's the same. But if there's certain things that you might say differently in Mexico than you would in Spain, then you could put those in the translation. So it's going to fall back, kind of like our app settings. It's going to go most specific to least specific. So it's going to first look and say, okay, I got a culture of es-mx. And it's going to look and say, oh, I've got an es-mx file. Let's go find the key in that file. If it doesn't find it in that file, it's going to fall back to the ES file, just the first two letters. If it doesn't find it there, it's going to fall back to just the app file. If it doesn't find it there, it's going to use the key value as the actual value on the page. Now, we never even created an es-es file. So everything's falling back just to the ES file. So that's how that works. But now if we run this app again, you'll notice that I changed the location and it still knows that. It still thinks I'm in Mexico. Therefore, it still says Hola Mundo because I've got that cookie installed that says, hey, this is what you're looking for. Therefore, we see that value. So we can change the value. Notice it stays on this page, but yet, and nothing seemed to happen because we didn't do any kind of change here. But if I change the US on here, go back to home, notice it's now in the USA format. So it remembered how to redirect us back to the right page, and does do a redirect because of Blazor Server. But now we can change cultures based upon this drop down here. And again, if we decide, you know what, I want to support a different culture. Let's say I want to support French. So all you need to do for this entire application is two things. One, go to appsettings.json, put a comma here and say fr-fr. So it's the French from France. Hit save. Now, if I didn't do anything else, I could run this and the application would now ask me what language or what culture, and France is one of the options. If I hit change, nothing seems to happen, except notice it now says Lundi 26 October and it flips these around. But it still says hello world because it's fallen back to the defaults because I never specified a resource file. So I right click, I say add, new item, resource file, and we're going to do the generic French. So app.fr.resx and hello world. And we'll say hello from France or French version. So I do not know French. So there's our French. It didn't save that. It has something to do with hitting enter afterwards. Because hit enter after you've filled the value in and then hit save. So if we run this now and we change, well, now it says hello French version because it found that resource file. So those are the two things you have to do to add a culture to your application now. Once you've added all the setup stuff that we've done, I would encourage you to go back and watch this video a couple times, create some test projects, but change your app settings to add that value, whatever it is, and then add the resource file with your translations. Done. That's it. You now can translate your entire application that way. Now, there's a lot of work to do here because it's not like there's some kind of magic pill you can put in where all of a sudden all the wording is translated. You notice that I just have hello world translated, not welcome to your new app, and not the survey prompt, and not the counter page, and there's a lot of stuff, even this little app to translate. Yep, there is. And that is going to take some work. But step one might be simply to just say at localizer and wrap the value. So you could say at localizer and then wrap this value. Done. Now, what I've done is I haven't done any translation on this, but what I could do, and this is what I typically do, I would come over to app, and first I'd have hello world, and then I'd put in here the same value, and then I'd put the next string, welcome to your app. I'd paste that value in again, and enter. So now I have a record of my defaults. So let's make sure that's still there. It is. So when I have the record of my defaults, I just keep going. I don't do anything else. But when it's time to create translations, I can hand somebody this file and just make a copy of it, rename it to app.fr.resx, and say, just change just the values. Everything else will be set up, and they can go through and say, okay, hello world's actually, and then fill it in and so on. And then it's going to change your entire application because you've already set it up for success. So there's some work to be done to set up localization, but once you get it set up, it's really quick to work with. So I encourage you to think this through with your application. When you're building an application, think of who you're reaching and who you can additionally reach if you were to meet them in their culture, if you were to present things in a way that makes sense to them. For example, whenever you put a date on a website, if you're in the US, it makes total sense to create a US date format, but in the rest of the world, pretty much it seems like they look at it and go, huh? Because, a month of 13 doesn't make sense, or a month of 30 doesn't make sense. And it's even worse, like I said, when it's February 12th, because it makes sense. It's October 2nd, or I'm sorry, December 2nd. And that's a confusion you don't want to add. And so if you can present your application, your website in the cultures where people are going to be using it, not just your own. And the way I do that is like I showed right here. Once you set it up, it's just a couple of setting tweaks and you're all set up for a new culture. You can add them fairly quickly. With that, I think that's all the topic I want to cover in this video. That's quite a lot, I know, but hopefully you got a lot of value out of this and you can see how to make your web applications even better. Now, there's a different way of doing this for Blazor WebAssembly. It's actually a little easier. And like I said, I showed that off in the Exploring Blazor course, Exploring Blazor WebAssembly. But, try this out in Blazor Server. Try out, see how it works for you, see how easy it is to get started once you get through the initial setup. Again, copy and paste my code. For the most part, it's just boilerplate. Once you've done that, you can even create your own template that just starts with localization already in, make your life even easier. And I have a video on how to create your own template as well. Thanks for listening. If you have any more suggestions for topics to cover in C#, leave them down in the comments below. If you have thoughts on this video, leave those down in the comments below. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your encouragement. I appreciate you suggesting new topics because it's because of those kind of things that I keep this channel going and I keep doing things to help you as a developer become a better C# developer easier. Thanks for listening. As always, I am Tim Corey.